All right, so welcome back to Singapore Property Talk Law. And, today we're really focusing in on like a huge shift from the HDB, that really affects you, especially, if you're a young couple dreaming of that,
Yeah.
owning that first home.
Absolutely.
And with us today to kind of really unpack these changes and really explore what they mean for
Yeah.
your property aspirations is Serene. Welcome.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me.
So this deep dive, we're going to be looking at the recent updates to the HDB income assessment rules
Right.
for BTO flats. And our mission today is to give you a clear understanding of how these new rules can really open up
Yeah,
more housing possibilities for young couples like yourselves.
for sure.
We'll look at the old way of doing things, what's changed, and crucially, how this might impact the type of flat you can afford and when you can make that purchase.
Absolutely.
So, Serene, to kind of get us started, what was the landscape like before this announcement? How did HDB use to assess the income of young couples applying for BTOs?
This is previously right. If young couples were hoping to get like a deferral of their income assessment, the requirements were
Quick.
quite specific.
Yep.
So typically, both individuals in the couple had to be either full-time students or serving NS,
Right?
or they had to have completed their studies or NS within 12 months leading up to their HDB flat eligibility letter application.
Got it.
And at least one applicant needed to be 30 or younger.
Okay.
So quite a limited set of circumstances.
So if one partner had been working for more than a year after graduation, even if the other was still studying,
Yeah.
they wouldn't be eligible for that deferral.
Most likely not.
But the rules have been updated.
Yes.
What's the crucial change here that you should be aware of?
So the key update announced by National Development Minister Desmond Lee on March 26 really loosens up those previous conditions. The crucial point here is as long as one person in the couple is enrolled as a full-time student or currently serving NS, you now have the option to defer your income assessment for the HDB housing loan until just before you collect the keys to your BTO flat. So this is a substantial shift.
It sounds like a game changer for many.
It is.
So what's the underlying reason for this policy change? What is the government aiming to achieve with this?
What's fascinating here is the rationale that Minister Lee laid out. The primary aim is to really empower young couples to settle down earlier.
Okay.
The thinking is by postponing that income assessment by the time key collection comes around, typically a few years after the initial application, both individuals would likely have progressed in their careers and have a higher combined income.
Right. Makes sense.
And that increased projected income could then enable couples to potentially qualify for a larger flat.
Okay.
He specifically mentioned 4 or 5 room units, especially if they're planning to grow their family.
Yeah, those first few years in the workforce can often bring, significant salary increases.
Absolutely.
Minister Lee even gave a specific example to illustrate how this might work in practice, didn't he? Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, he did. He provided a clear example of a young couple with a current total household income of $3,500 per month.
Okay.
In their situation, one partner is still pursuing their studies while the other has been employed for about a year. Under the previous regulations, their income at the time of application might have restricted them to considering a 3-room BTO flat,
Right.
perhaps in a more outlying area like Yushun, as he used in his example.
So potentially a smaller flat
Yeah.
in a less central location based on their income at the application stage.
Exactly.
How does this picture change for them under the new deferred assessment?
Under this expanded scheme, that same couple can now proceed with their BTO application.
Yep.
However, the assessment for their HDB housing loan, along with the evaluation for the enhanced CPF housing grant, which, by the way, helps with the initial cost of buying your flat, is now deferred until closer to the estimated key collection date,
Okay.
which could be around 3 years down the line.
Mm-hmm.
Minister Lee suggested that by then, with both partners likely working full-time, their combined monthly income might have risen to, say, $7,500. So this significant projected increase in income could then make them eligible for a larger 4-room or even a 5-room BTO flat.
That's a really significant difference in terms of potential housing options.
Yeah.
It's not just about the size of the flat, though, is it? I remember reading that the potential for choosing a more desirable location comes into play as well.
Precisely. As Minister Lee highlighted, this policy change could also be a boon for couples who might be perfectly content with a smaller 3-room flat, but have their hearts set on living in a location closer to the city center and its amenities. Flats in these more central areas tend to come with a higher price tag, and the deferred assessment, which could lead to a larger loan eligibility based on future income, might make these more sought-after locations accessible even if they opt for a smaller unit size.
Right.
So it really is about providing more flexibility in your choices.
More choices in terms of both size and location.
Yeah.
So that's a key takeaway. Now, even with this deferred assessment for the loan, there's still the initial financial commitment, isn't there?
Yeah.
What about the down payment required?
That's an important point to remember. While the income assessment for the housing loan is deferred, the initial down payment is still a necessary upfront cost. Currently, this typically stands at 2.5% of the total price of the flat. So while the bulk of the financial evaluation happens later, you still need to have that initial capital saved up.
Crucial detail to keep in mind. So who specifically is this expanded scheme designed to benefit? Which groups of young individuals are now included?
The primary focus is definitely on assisting recent graduates in their homeownership journey. Minister Lee specifically mentioned graduates from universities, polytechnics, and ITE as the groups who will see the most benefit from this broadened eligibility for deferred assessment.
Okay, this policy update isn't happening in isolation, is it? There were mentions of other housing initiatives around the same time. How does this change in income assessment fit into the bigger picture of Singapore's housing strategy?
If we connect this to the broader housing landscape, Minister Lee also announced plans to increase the supply of BTO flats with significantly shorter waiting times,
Okay.
aiming for a waiting period of under 3 years, with approximately 12,000 such flats expected to be launched between 2025 and 2027. This is part of a larger commitment to launch more than 50,000 flats during that same period. This context really suggests a comprehensive approach to addressing the housing needs of Singaporeans, both by making it easier for young couples to qualify for a home and by increasing the overall availability of flats.
Affordability is always a major concern, for prospective homeowners, especially with these discussions, around rising resale flat prices. Did Minister Lee address any of those concerns in his announcement?
He did. He acknowledged the anxieties that many people feel when they hear about resale flats fetching million-dollar prices. However, he provided reassurance by emphasizing that a wide range of affordable housing options continues to be available.
Okay.
He also touched upon the introduction of the new flat classification system, Standard, Plus, and Prime, as a strategic measure to manage what's often referred to as the lottery effect associated with securing prime location flats. Notably, these Plus and Prime category flats will come with stricter resale conditions such as a longer minimum occupation period and a subsidy clawback mechanism. But they're also designed with additional subsidies to ensure they remain affordable for first-time buyers.
So it sounds like the government is trying to tackle housing affordability from multiple angles. And it appears that this change in income assessment is already influencing how some young couples are approaching their home buying plans.
Absolutely. The news report included an anecdote about Stephen Gann, a fourth-year business student who shared that with these more relaxed rules, she and her boyfriend are now seriously considering applying for a 4-room prime or plus flat in the Bayshore area. Previously, they had considered such an option to be financially out of reach, but the prospect of their combined income being significantly higher by the time of key collection has now made it a realistic possibility in their minds.
So to bring it all together for you, our listener, this update to HDB's income assessment for BTO flats represents a significant development that could genuinely broaden your horizons as a young couple in Singapore looking to buy your first home.
Definitely.
You might now find yourselves in a position to aim for a larger flat or one in a more central location than you previously thought possible, even if one of you is still studying or just starting your career. This deferred assessment essentially shifts the crucial financial evaluation to a point in time when your combined earning potential is likely to be considerably higher.
This leads to a really important point for all of you to think about.
Yeah.
How might this change in HDB policy influence your personal timelines for making plans to settle down and potentially start a family? What kind of housing goals that might have seemed distant before now feel more attainable?
Right.
And on a broader level, what further questions does this raise for you about the long-term landscape of housing affordability and your own financial planning here in Singapore?
Definitely some important questions to consider, as you navigate that home buying journey.
For sure.
And for those of you who are actively planning your next steps, it's certainly worth keeping a close eye on the upcoming July BTO exercise to see these new rules in action.
Absolutely.
Thanks for tuning in to this in-depth look at the latest HDB changes here on Singapore Property Talk Law.
See you next time.
See you.